The bar was loud until she walked in. Eagle's Roost sat at the edge of the valley where the county road bent south and the trees closed in on both sides like a corridor no one had bothered to widen. The building itself was older than anyone who drank there, a flat-roofed cinder block structure with a hand-painted sign above the door showing an eagle mid-dive talons, forward wings pulled tight against its body. The paint had faded to the color of rust over the years, bleached by summers and cracked by winters until the original red of the eagle's breast had turned to something closer to dried clay, and the sky behind it, once a deep blue that someone had mixed from 3 different cans in the back of a hardware store, had gone pale and chalky. The eagle's eyes had been touched up twice in the last decade by a man named Dutch, who was better at rebuilding carburetors than he was at painting, and the touch-ups showed in the way the eyes didn't quite match, one slightly larger than the other, giving the bird a lopsided intensity that the regulars had come to appreciate as character rather than flaw. But the sign still caught the light when the angle was right. In the evenings when the sun dropped below the ridge and the last of its light came through the valley at a low slant, the sign threw a pale orange glow across the gravel lot that made the place look almost warm. It was the kind of glow that promised nothing and delivered exactly that, but it was consistent, and in a valley where consistency was the closest thing most people had to comfort, the sign did its job. The lot held 16 motorcycles tonight, lined in 2 rows along the front of the building, like sentries that had taken their posts and settled in for the duration. Most of them were older machines, heavy-framed and scarred from road miles, their chrome dulled to pewter under the misting rain that had been falling since late afternoon. The engines ticked softly as they cooled in the damp air, the quiet metallic language of machines at rest, and the rainwater ran in thin streams across the gravel between them, collecting in tire ruts and reflecting the bar sign in broken fragments of orange light. A few pickup trucks filled the far end of the lot near the tree line, their windshields beaded with rain, and one rusted sedan sat by itself under a broken floodlight that hadn't worked since the summer before last. The gravel was dark with water, and the potholes held shallow puddles that nobody bothered to avoid because wet boots were a permanent condition from October through March, and complaining about it was considered a waste of good breath. Inside, the noise had its own architecture. Pool balls cracking against each other near the back wall, where a single overhead lamp threw a cone of yellow light onto green felt that had been patched in 2 places with material that didn't quite match. The balls moved across the surface with the irregular rhythm of a game being played by men who cared more about the conversation than the score. A jukebox that someone had fed quarters into an hour ago and then forgotten about sat against the wall near the restroom hallway playing songs from a decade nobody missed. But everybody remembered songs about highways and heartbreak and the particular kind of freedom that sounds better in a 3-minute chorus than it feels on a Tuesday morning. The music wasn't quite loud enough to dominate, but it was present enough to feel in the floor beneath your boots a low vibration that moved through the building's foundation and into the soles of your feet. Conversation layered over conversation in the particular cadence of men who had known each other for 20 or 30 years, men who could communicate more with a shift in posture than most people could with a paragraph. Laughter came in bursts that rolled across the room and dissipated. Arguments about engine specifications and football scores rose to a certain volume and then retreated following the natural rhythm of disputes between people who would be sitting in the same seats tomorrow night, having the same arguments with the same level of conviction and the same lack of consequence. The air smelled of beer and leather and the particular damp that comes when autumn rain meets old wood, a smell that had been building in this room for decades and had become as much a part of the structure as the joists and the cinder blocks. Cigarette smoke had been banned inside for 6 years, but the ghosts of it lingered in the ceiling tiles, and the curtains behind the pool table, and the deep grain of the wooden bar top, a phantom scent that rose when the humidity changed, as if the building itself was remembering something it wasn't ready to let go of. The overhead lights were the yellow kind that flattered nothing but made everything feel honest, the kind of light that added 10 years to your face and took the pretense off the room, and nobody minded because pretense was not a commodity that traded well at Eagle's Roost. Behind the bar, Amos moved with the economy of a man who had been pouring drinks in this room for 11 years and could do it with his eyes closed, and frequently did, at least metaphorically, when the hour grew late and the orders became predictable. He was 6'3" with hands the size of dinner plates and a face that didn't ask questions it didn't need answers to. His features were arranged with the blunt simplicity of a man who had never spent a moment considering what he looked like and never would, and his expression at rest was the expression of a bolder present and immovable and entirely unconcerned with the weather. He wore the same thing every night, a black t-shirt and jeans and a canvas apron that he washed every Sunday whether it needed it or not, and he moved through the space behind the bar the way water moves through a channel, finding the easiest path without disturbing anything on either side. He rarely spoke. When he did, his voice was low and even and carried exactly as far as it needed to, and no further. And the words he used were always the correct ones in the correct order and never one more than necessary. At the far end of the bar, Sully sat on his regular stool with a glass of dark beer in front of him and the newspaper folded to the crossword, which he worked with the pencil that he kept behind his left ear when he wasn't using it and behind his right ear when he was thinking about a clue. He was the oldest among them, 67, broad-shouldered, even now, with the kind of frame that age reduces but doesn't diminish, like a bridge that has lost some of its paint but none of its load-bearing capacity. His gray beard was trimmed close to his jaw in a line that followed the bone, and his hands had done more kinds of work than anyone in the room could catalog, from framing houses to field-stripping rifles to delivering a calf in a barn at 2 in the morning during a thunderstorm in 1989, which was a story he told only when asked and then only the short version. He had been a carpenter before he was a writer and a soldier before he was a carpenter, and the combination of those three lives had produced a man who moved with deliberate purpose and spoke only when his words would improve upon the silence. He knew the valley the way a mapmaker knows a map, not just the roads and the buildings, but the connections between them, the histories layered under the surfaces, the things that had happened in certain places, that the places themselves still remembered even when the people had forgotten. Wyatt was at the pool table lining up a shot he had no intention of making because the game had stopped being about pool 30 minutes ago and had become about the conversation he was having with Dutch about a transmission problem in a 1978 Harley-Davidson shovelhead that neither of them could solve. But both of them enjoyed discussing the way some men enjoy discussing theology with passion and detail, in the comfortable understanding that no definitive answer would be reached tonight or possibly ever. Wyatt was 38, lean and angular, with a face that the wind had worked on the way wind works on sandstone, removing the soft parts and leaving the structure visible, and he kept his hair short because anything longer interfered with his helmet, and because vanity was a concept he had examined once and rejected as irrelevant. He was the best writer among them and the quietest about it, and when something needed to be scouted or surveyed or observed from a distance, Wyatt was the one who went because he had the patience for it in the eyes. Reed sat on a stool near the middle of the bar, positioned with his back to the wall and his line of sight covering both the front door and the hallway that had led to the restrooms and the back exit. He didn't sit this way on purpose. It was instinct, the residual architecture of a mind that had spent 8 years in the military and had never fully demobilized. His body chose positions the way a compass needle chooses north automatically and without consultation, always orienting toward the configuration that offered the best combination of visibility and protection. He was 44, compact and dense built, like a man who had been assembled from parts that were slightly smaller than average, but significantly more durable. And he had a stillness about him that people sometimes mistook for calm. It was not calm exactly, it was readiness. The coiled quiet of a mechanism that could go from rest to full function in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He was drinking water tonight. He drank water most nights. He said it was because he liked to be clear, and nobody questioned it because the way Reed said things made questioning them seem unnecessary. And Dale sat at his usual table near the back corner, the table that had been his for 12 years, and that nobody else sat at even when the bar was full, and every other surface in the room was occupied by elbows and glasses and the accumulated debris of an evening's drinking. Nobody had been told not to sit there. Nobody had been warned or threatened or given a look. The table was Dale's the way a particular stretch of river belongs to a particular fisherman through the accumulated weight of presence and time and the unspoken understanding that some things belong to certain people, and the question of why is less important than the fact of it. He was 53 years old with hands that looked like they had been carved from the same wood as the bar top, thick across the knuckles and scarred across the back's hands that had built things and broken things and held things together when the things wanted to come apart. His face carried its years the way a valley carries a river, every line earned, and none of them hidden the creases around his eyes deep enough to hold shadow, and the line of his jaw set in the permanent position of a man who had made more hard decisions than easy ones, and had stopped expecting the ratio to change. His hair was gray at the temples and dark everywhere else, and he wore it pushed back from his forehead in a way that suggested he had given it one pass with his hand that morning and hadn't thought about it since. His vest hung open across a flannel shirt that had been washed enough times to go soft at the collar. The plaid faded to a memory of its original pattern, and the leather of the vest was dark with age and wear supple, in the way leather becomes supple when it has been rained on and dried and rained on again for more years than most leather survives. The patches on the vest told a story that most people in the room already knew, and the rest had the good sense not to ask about. They were arranged in the specific configuration that meant specific things to specific people, and to everyone else they were simply patches on a vest, colorful and mysterious and vaguely intimidating, in the way all insignia is vaguely intimidating when you don't know what it signifies. Dale was nursing a glass of bourbon, his second of the evening, and he was watching nothing in particular. His eyes moved across the room the way they always did, not searching but scanning, tracking movement and sound, and the subtle shifts in energy that told him what was happening in his bar without requiring anyone to explain it. This was his domain, not by title or deed or any piece of paper filed in any office, but by the accumulated weight of years and trust and the particular kind of authority that comes from being the man people turn to when they don't know what to do next. The front door opened, and the rain came in with someone small. The door was heavy, a solid wood slab with iron hardware that had been installed when the building was new and maintained since then, with the kind of irregular attention that left some of the screws tight and others loose, and the hinges singing a different note depending on the humidity. Tonight it groaned low and steady as it swung inward, and the sound cut through the bar noise with the familiarity of a clock striking an hour, pulling a few glances toward the entrance. The way any opening door pulls glances in a room full of people who are paying more attention than they appear to be. What those glances found was not what anyone expected. She was small. That was the first thing, small in the way that children are small when you see them in a context built for adults, the scale of the room making her dimensions emphatic. Her height barely reaching the top of the nearest bar stool, her shoulders narrower than the width of the door she had just come through. She was a child in a room full of men, and the contrast was immediate and absolute, like finding a songbird in an engine shop. She moved past the pool tables without looking at them. She moved past Dutch, who had turned with his cue in his hand and his mouth slightly open in the universal expression of a man whose train of thought has been interrupted by something his brain hasn't finished categorizing. She moved past Wyatt, who straightened from his shot and tracked her with the focused attention he usually reserved for road conditions at high speed. She moved past the jukebox and the two men standing near it, with their beers suspended halfway to their mouths in identical gestures of interrupted motion. She moved through the bar like a stone through water, displacing the space around her without being deflected by it, walking with the unwavering trajectory of someone who had somewhere specific to be and had already calculated the fastest route to get there and had no interest in any alternative. Her shoes left wet prints on the floor behind her. Small prints, evenly spaced, deliberate. The prints of someone who had been walking for a long time and had learned to conserve energy with every step. Each print was the same distance from the last, the rhythm of a practiced walker who had covered enough ground to develop a cadence that was efficient rather than natural, and they traced a perfectly straight line from the door to the back corner of the room where Dale sat with his bourbon and his quiet authority, and his eyes that had stopped scanning the room and fixed on her with the total attention of a man who recognized the arrival of something significant. She stopped at his table. Dale looked up slowly. The way a man looks up when he has learned that sudden movements are rarely necessary and almost never helpful, and that the quality of his attention matters more than the speed of his reaction. The first thing he noticed was that she was a child. The second thing he noticed was her age, which he placed at 10, give or take a year in either direction, based on the proportions of her face and the length of her limbs, and the particular way she held herself, which was not the way a younger child holds herself, and not yet the way an older one does. The third thing he noticed was her condition. She was soaking wet from the drizzle outside. Her bright red rain jacket was half a size too big for her, the sleeves pushed up past her wrists in a way that looked intentional rather than careless, rolled once and tucked so they wouldn't interfere with her hands. The jacket was a good one, or had been once the kind of jacket someone had bought for a child they expected to grow into it, and the red was vivid even under the yellow bar lights, a sharp, bright red that stood out against the brown and black and denim of the room like a signal fire in a dark field. The jacket had a small tear at the left pocket, and the tear had been carefully folded over and tucked to keep the lining from showing the kind of repair a child makes when there is no adult available to make it properly, and the child has decided that the appearance of order matters even when order itself is beyond reach. Her rain boots had once been yellow but had faded to the color of old butter, and the rubber was cracked along both soles in places where the flex of walking had stressed the material beyond its tolerance. They were children's boots, the kind sold in grocery stores and hardware stores, and everywhere else that sells things cheaply and without warranty, and they had been used well past the point where a reasonable adult would have replaced them. They left small wet marks on the floor, and the marks were already beginning to dry at the edges as the bar's warmth worked on them. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a high ponytail that had somehow held through the rain, pulled tight and practical, secured with a plain elastic band that showed no sign of decoration or personality, the kind of band you buy in a bag of 50 for $1 at a convenience store. It was the ponytail of a girl who has looked in a mirror and decided that neatness is something she can control even when nothing else is, and who has made a commitment to that control that she honors without exception. Her face was young and unfinished, and in the way all children's faces are still being shaped by the forces that would eventually determine its adult architecture. But her eyes were not young. Her eyes were brown and dry and focused in a way that did not belong to a child her age. There was no fear in them. There was no nervousness, no hesitation, no searching scan of the room for reassurance or exit. There was something else instead, something more complicated and more concerning. The particular expression of someone who has been afraid for so long that fear has become a background condition rather than an event, a weather system rather than a storm, present always and therefore present, nowhere absorbed into the baseline of daily experience until it no longer registered as a distinct sensation, but simply as the texture of being alive. Around her neck, on a thin silver chain, hung a ring. Dale's chair scraped back against the floor. The sound cut through the bar noise like a blade through paper, sharp and brief and final, and every head in the room that hadn't already turned now did. Dale did not notice them. He did not notice Wyatt setting down his pool cue with the careful deliberation of a man clearing his hands. He did not notice Dutch stepping back from the table. He did not notice the two men near the jukebox lowering their beers. He did not notice Reed shifting his weight on his stool, the small preparatory adjustment that preceded any significant change in his status from rest to ready. He did not notice any of it because he was looking at the ring. It was a plain silver band, small enough to fit on a woman's finger, too large for the child who wore it on a chain. The surface was slightly tarnished in the way silver tarnishes when it is worn against skin for years, the oxidation darkening the crevices and leaving the raised surfaces bright, creating a contrast that made the details more visible than they had been when the ring was new. A tiny cross was etched into the face of the ring, cut shallow by an amateur hand that had been careful but not skilled, the lines of the cross slightly uneven in a way that gave it character without diminishing its clarity. The horizontal bar was a fraction longer on the left side than the right, and the vertical bar was not perfectly centered, and these imperfections were as familiar to Dale as the lines on his own palms because he had made them. He had made them with a borrowed engraving tool on a winter afternoon in his mother's garage in 1997. He had been 20 years old working on his first motorcycle, a project that consumed his weekends and most of his weeknights and all of his disposable income and a significant portion of his attention that should have been directed toward other things. The garage was cold that day, cold enough that his breath showed in the air and his fingers were stiff on the tools, and the light came through the windows at the low angle that meant December was settling in and the days had gotten as short as they were going to get before the slow turn back towards spring. His younger sister had come in through the side door. She always came in through the side door, never the front, because the side door was closer to the house, and because she had decided years ago that the side door was her door and the front door was for guests, and she was not a guest in her brother's garage. She was 16, then thin and serious with dark eyes that noticed everything and cataloged it in a filing system that was more organized than anything Dale maintained in his own mind. She had a way of standing in doorways that made you feel like she was evaluating the room before committing to entering it, her weight on one foot, her shoulder against the frame, her head tilted at a slight angle that suggested she was listening to something that wasn't making a sound. She asked him what he was making. He told her he was building something that would take him away from this valley. She said she didn't want him to go. He said he wasn't asking her permission. She picked up the ring from the workbench where he had left it next to a wrench and a set of spark plugs, and she turned it in her fingers, examining the cross he had etched that morning with the borrowed engraving tool and more patience than he usually had for anything. The wrench slipped on the bench and caught the ring's edge as it fell, leaving a thin scratch in the silver at a shallow angle. Dale was angry about it for 3 minutes, the hot, irrational anger of a young man who has put effort into something small and seen it damaged. Then she put the ring on her finger and smiled at him, and he forgot to be angry at all. He gave it to her the following winter, Sissy, the winter she turned 17. He wrapped it in newspaper because he didn't own wrapping paper and tied it with a piece of twine he cut from a spool in the garage. She opened it on Christmas morning in the kitchen of their mother's house, sitting at the table in her pajamas, with her hair still messed from sleep, and she pulled the newspaper apart and found the ring inside, and put it on her right hand and looked at him with an expression that he would remember for the rest of his life, but never be able to describe with any precision, because some expressions exist outside the vocabulary of description. She never took it off. Not once as far as he knew in all the years that followed. Not in the years when they were close, and not in the years when they were not, and not in the years when she was gone, and he didn't know whether she was alive. He had not seen it in 11 years, not since the night Nora disappeared. "Where did you get that?" he asked. The girl looked at him steadily. She did not flinch at his tone. She did not step back or look away or make herself smaller, which were the things Dale would have expected from any child her age when addressed with the particular intensity that had come through in his voice, despite his effort to control it. "From my mother," she said. "She told me you'd know what it means." The bar had gone completely still. Pool cues rested on tables. Glasses stayed where they were. The jukebox played on, but no one heard it. Even Amos behind the bar had gone still, with a glass in one hand and a towel in the other, watching the corner booth with the particular attention of a man who had seen many things in this room and was recognizing the arrival of something new. Dale sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the ring, then at the girl, then at the ring again. His fingers were very still against the wood, the kind of still that comes from effort rather than calm. The kind of still that a man produces when his body wants to move and his mind is telling it to wait, because the next thing he does needs to be the right thing, and he doesn't yet know what the right thing is. "Sit down," he said. The girl sat across from him without hesitation. She pulled herself onto the bench seat in a single practice motion and settled with her spine straight and her hands on the table, palms down, fingers together. She had either decided that Dale was not a threat, or she had decided it didn't matter because the business she had come to conduct was more important than the risk. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ruby? How old are you?" 10. "Your mother," he said carefully, keeping his voice even. "What's her name?" "Nora," Ruby said. "Nora Mills." The name moved through the bar like a current through water, invisible but felt. Wyatt, standing at the bar behind Dale, set his glass down on the wood. Reed, sitting on his stool near the middle of the bar, turned slightly. Neither of them spoke. Dale kept his expression neutral. "Where is she?" Ruby's hands moved from the table to her lap, the controlled movement of a child who had learned to hide her hands when the conversation moved toward things that hurt. "I don't know," she said. "She gave me the ring 2 weeks ago. She said if anything happened to her, I should find the bar with the eagle sign and show it to whoever was in charge." She paused. "She said you'd know what it meant." Outside, the drizzle had thickened. The early autumn dark was settling faster than usual, pressing against the windows with the gray-orange light of late dusk. Dale could hear the rain against the roof, low and steady. 2 weeks ago," Dale said. "Where have you been since then?" Something crossed Ruby's face. The practiced blankness of someone who had learned not to let the wrong things show at the wrong times. Not the blankness of a child, the blankness of a person who had been taught that certain expressions were dangerous. "A house," she said. "They said it was temporary." "Who said?" "The people who run it." She looked at her hands, then she looked back up. "There are 6 of us there, kids, My brother Levi is still there. He's 9. Wyatt set his glass down a second time. Reed turned fully on his stool facing the room. How did you get here? Dale asked. Walked, Ruby said. I've been looking for the eagle sign for 3 days. Dale studied her, the dark circles under her eyes, the careful repair at the jacket pocket, the cracked boots, the way she sat with her spine straight, conserving energy. Are you hungry? He asked. Yes, she said. No hesitation, no embarrassment. Dale turned toward the bar. Amos, get her something. Amos moved to the kitchen without a word. Ruby watched Dale steadily. You knew her, she said, not a question. She's my sister, Dale said. The words sat in the room like stones dropped into still water. Ruby absorbed them without visible reaction, which told Dale something. Nora had prepared her, had told her daughter enough about the man at the Eagle's Roost that the answer didn't come as a shock. She said you hadn't spoken in a long time, Ruby said carefully. We hadn't, Dale said. That was my fault. I told her she was making bad choices. She stopped returning my calls. By the time I tried again, the number was disconnected. The words opened a door in his memory that he had kept closed for years. The last conversation with his sister. 11 years ago in this bar. Nora had come in, 23, then thin and serious, wearing a canvas jacket too light for the weather. She had sat across from him and told him she was worried about something. Children, she said. She had been working part-time at a social services office and noticed discrepancies in case files. Placements that didn't add up. Children who appeared in the system and disappeared without proper documentation. Names that matched in ways that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Dale had not listened, not the way she needed him to. He had looked at his younger sister and seen what he always saw, a woman who was too smart for her own good and too reckless with where that intelligence took her. He told her to stop playing detective, pressing the word flat until it sounded foolish rather than brave. She looked at him with an expression he would never forget, the expression of someone who had come to the one person she trusted most and found that trust misplaced. She left the bar without finishing her drink. The door closed behind her. He let it close. She never said anything bad about you, Ruby had said. Dale didn't answer that. The weight of his failure with Nora was not something he could explain to her daughter. Do you know why she disappeared? Ruby asked. Not yet, Dale said. Tell me about the house first. She told him. She spoke quietly and without drama, the flat recitation of a child who had processed something so thoroughly that the emotion had been worn smooth by repetition. The way a stone in a river loses its edges, not because the water is strong, but because the water never stops. She was delivering information with the precision of a person who understood that accuracy was more important than emphasis. The house was on Granger Street, at the end of the road past the old mill in the section of the valley where the houses were older and farther apart and the street lights stopped trying. A single-story structure at the front with an addition built onto the back that pushed the building deeper into the property than it looked from the road. A fence around the perimeter, a gate at the back that opened onto an alley. A man named Bryce ran it. He was in his 50s, thick through the jaw and shoulders with the particular authority of someone who had built a small kingdom and ruled it through control rather than force. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He had constructed a system of rules and consequences that operated with the mechanical efficiency of a machine, and the machine ran whether he was watching it or not. The children inside the machine understood that the machine was the truth of their lives and that Bryce was its operator, and that the operator's word was the only word that mattered. There were always 2 or 3 other adults rotating through the house, never the same ones for more than a few days. They appeared and disappeared on a schedule that Ruby had tried to track but couldn't quite predict, arriving in vehicles she could sometimes see from the upstairs window and departing at hours that suggested they did not want their movements observed. The kids slept 4 to a room. They were told not to use the phone. There was a phone in Bryce's office behind a locked door, and Ruby had never seen any of the children use it. They were not allowed visitors. Nothing left the house without Bryce's knowledge. Mail was collected by Bryce. The television received 4 channels and none were news. Levi's 9, Ruby said. He does what he's told. That's how he gets by. He's learned that if he follows the rules exactly, if he doesn't ask questions and doesn't make noise, the days pass and nothing bad happens to him specifically. He's made himself invisible. She paused. The pause was weighted with something she was deciding whether to say. But Bryce has been paying more attention to him lately. more than the others. Walking past his room at night, asking him questions about whether he likes it here, whether he's comfortable. The questions sound kind if you don't know what they mean. She looked at Dale. I know what they mean. That's why I left when I did. Dale's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Something that had been still began to move with the slow, deliberate force of a river changing course. Amos came back with a bowl of soup and bread. He set it in front of Ruby, with both hands arranging it with the care of someone who understood that the presentation of food to a hungry person was an act of respect. Then he pulled a chair to the end of the booth and sat in it, a quiet statement of where he stood. Ruby picked up the spoon and started eating with focused steadiness. Methodical. Complete. She ate the way a soldier eats, missing nothing, wasting nothing, keeping her eyes on the food because a child who trusted the food to still be there, when she looked back down, had decided at least provisionally that she was somewhere safe. Dale stood and moved to the bar. Wyatt and Reed were already close. Granger Street, Dale said low. You know it. End of the valley, Wyatt said. Old residential, 3 or 4 blocks past the mill. Dead-end road. I need eyes on it. Slow pass, don't stop. Tell me what you see. Wyatt was already pulling on his jacket. He was through the door in under a minute, his engine fading into the rain. Reed leaned against the bar. How does she know you? She doesn't. Her mother is my sister. Reed was quiet. The one you've been looking for. Yeah. Reed nodded once. He stayed at the bar. He waited. Dale went back to the table. Ruby had finished most of the soup and was working through the bread. When she looked up, she said, there's something else. Something. There was a boy, she said. Tate, he was 12. 3 weeks ago, Bryce told him he was going on a field trip. Activities, he called it. She looked at the table. Levi told me he saw Tate get into the van from the upstairs window. Tate didn't have any bags. He didn't take his jacket. He didn't take the book he was reading. He got in the van, and the van left, and he hasn't come back. The bar was very quiet now. Bryce said Tate got placed with a family, but I watched from the window too. Tate looked scared when he got in the van. He didn't look like someone going to a family. There's one more thing, Ruby said. Bryce keeps a binder in his office upstairs. He keeps it locked, but I saw it once when the door was open. It has all our names in it, and next to some of the names there are dates. She paused. Levi's name has a date next to it. It's circled. It's next week. The clock behind the bar read 7:43. Dale looked at it. Curfew at 9. 1 hour and 17 minutes before someone started counting beds. Does Bryce know you're gone? He asked. Not yet. Curfew's at 9. Ruby reached into the pocket of her rain jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out. Dale took it and unfolded it. A map, hand-drawn, pencil on lined paper torn carefully from a notebook. Granger Street rendered in careful lines neater than most adults could manage. The house marked with an X. The back alley sketched with details that showed she had walked it more than once, noting the width of the passage, the location of a dumpster, the position of a streetlight that didn't work, and the gap in the fence 3 houses down where a person could cut through to the parallel street. The back gate was marked with a small arrow, and in the corner in careful printing, Levi's room is the second window on the left upstairs. You planned this, Dale said. I planned everything I could, Ruby said. The rest I left to you. I left notes on my pillow each morning. I wrote that I was sick and staying in bed. Bryce doesn't come upstairs during the day unless he has a reason. He didn't have a reason. When did he last see you in person? 4 days ago, he'll notice at curfew, 9 o'clock. She reached into her jacket again and pulled out a second piece of paper, smaller, folded tight. A list. 6 names, ages, descriptions. Levi 9, dark hair, quiet. Tate 12, tall, missing, 3 weeks. Gemma 7, red hair, scared of loud noises. Oliver 11, wears glasses. Paz 8, doesn't talk much. And Ruby 10. At the bottom, Bryce sleeps downstairs. Office is second door on the left. Binder in the desk drawer. Key in his jacket pocket. Dale looked at the list. He looked at the map. He looked at Ruby. You wrote all of this before you left. I wrote it the first night. I had 3 days. I used them. He put the papers in his vest pocket. He looked at Amos. Stay with her. Don't let her leave. Don't let anyone in you don't know. Amos nodded. He shifted his chair between the booth and the door. Ruby watched Dale turn toward the door. One more thing, she said. Dale stopped. Bryce has cameras at the front gate. I forgot to put it on the map. If you go through the front, he'll see you before you get to the door. Dale pulled the map out and looked at it again. The back alley. You saw behind Chiesa. The gate with the arrow. She had drawn him a way in that avoided the front entirely. She had accounted for everything, including the thing she forgot by remembering it now. Bring him back, she said. Dale pushed through the bar door into the drizzle. The early autumn night pressed down around him. The bar sign threw pale orange light across the wet gravel. He stood on the step and let the rain hit his face while he organized what he knew. He called Sully first. Deputy Harlan, welfare concern on Granger Street, within the hour. Come dark. No lights, no sirens until I call it. Harlan owes me from the Kellerman business, Sully said. He'll move. Tell him to move fast. He relayed Ruby's warning about the cameras to Reed, who was already at his bike. Then he looked out at the dark tree line and thought about a 9-year-old boy named Levi sitting in a house with a man who kept a binder full of names and circled dates. The boy didn't know his sister had spent 3 days walking through the rain to find a faded eagle on a bar sign. Engines came to life across the parking lot one after another, low and steady, patient and certain. Dale swung onto his bike. Through the window he could see the corner booth. Ruby sat with both hands around her water glass, the ring catching the bar light small and silver against the red of her jacket. Amos sat across from her, immovable. The column formed behind Dale, Reed on his right, Wyatt directly behind back from his scouting run. They rode without headlights, engines low, following the county road south toward the end of the valley. The rain came down steadily, and the bare autumn trees, Uljournewan, pressed close on both sides, catching the wet dark. Nobody spoke. The house at the end of Granger Street appeared as Wyatt had described it. Single story at the front with the addition pushing it deeper. 2 windows lit, curtains drawn. The white van in the driveway, no plates on the front. A second vehicle at the curb, newer, out of state. Engine cold, windows fogged. Dale raised his fist. The column stopped. 8:41 on his phone, 19 minutes. He cut his engine. One by one the others followed until the only sound was rain through branches. He unfolded Ruby's map against his thigh, reading it one more time. Reed, alley, back gate. Take 3. Wait for my signal. Reed was already moving. 3 men followed. They disappeared into the dark in 30 seconds. Wyatt, front of the property, visible. Wyatt positioned himself at the foot of the driveway. Behind him, the remaining men spread across the street and the property edges. Their presence a fact rather than a threat. Sully appeared at Dale's shoulder. Harlan is 8 minutes out. 2 units. Dark. No lights until I call it. Dale walked to the front door. He could see the camera above the frame. Ruby had been right. But Reed was in the alley and the back gate was covered. He knocked twice. Hard. Silence. Then heavy footsteps. Unhurried. The footsteps of someone not expecting trouble. The door opened 4 inches on a chain. A man's face appeared. 50s thick jaw, flannel shirt sleeves rolled. He looked at Dale, then at Wyatt, then at the shapes of men in the street. Help you, Bryce, Dale said. Who's asking? My name's Dale. I'm here about the children in this house. This is a licensed residential care facility. You have no business here. I've got a 10-year-old girl at my bar who says different. And I've got questions about a 12-year-old named Tate who got into your van 3 weeks ago and hasn't been seen since. Bryce's eyes went to the street. He was counting. You need to leave, or I'm calling the police. Deputy Harlan is already on his way. Should be here in about 6 minutes. So you can close that door and wait for him, or you can open it and we can talk about Levi before he gets here. That's the only choice you have tonight. The name Levi landed like a stone, a tightening around Bryce's eyes. The door closed. The chain rattled. The door opened fully. Dale walked in. The front hall was narrow. Institutional cleaning product and something underneath. A staircase on the right. A common room at the end of the hall, television on low 3, children on a couch. All 3 looked up. None of them moved. Where's Levi? Upstairs in bed. Get him. You don't have the authority. Get him. Bryce called up the staircase. Silence. Then small footsteps, careful and slow. The footsteps of a child who had learned that being called downstairs at night was not always neutral. A boy appeared at the top of the stairs. 9 years old, dark hair, t-shirt, 2 sizes too large, socks with a hole in the left toe. He looked at Bryce first, then at Dale, then at Dale's vest, and something happened on his face that was too fast to follow. Your sister sent me, Dale said. Levi's face did something that would have broken the heart of anyone watching who had children of their own. Relief, confusion, and the grief of someone who had been holding themselves together for a very long time and had just been given permission to stop. He came down 1 step at a time. Is she okay? His voice was smaller than Dale expected. She's safe. She's been safe since this evening. She's waiting for you. Levi looked at the floor. He pressed his lips together hard, and his jaw worked, and then he looked back up with eyes that were very bright and very steady. She came back, he said. Not a question. Something he was saying out loud to make it real. She never left. She just went ahead to get help. Then Dale heard it. A door closing at the back of the house. Carefully, the particular sound of someone who did not want the sound to carry. His eyes moved to Bryce. The smallest shift in the man's weight. The unconscious preparation of someone who knows something is happening behind him. Who else is in this house? Nobody. Dale hit Reed's number. Back door just opened, Reed said. Woman came out with a kid. We've got them. Dale looked at Bryce. The composure was thinner now. Bring the boy inside, Reed. 30 seconds later, the back door opened. Reed came through with a woman in her 40s, thin-faced, dark jacket with the collar turned up. Behind her, a boy, not Levi, Oliver. No glasses, no jacket, dressed hurriedly. The woman Delia looked at Bryce. Something passed between them. Where were you taking him? Medical appointment, Bryce said. At 8:45 at night, through the back door. Tires on wet asphalt outside. Harlan arriving with 2 units dark. Bryce's shoulders settled. The stillness of a man who understood the evening had changed irrevocably. Deputy Harlan came through the front door. He read the room in one sweep. Dale, Harlan, start with a binder in the office upstairs. Second door on the left. Desk drawer keys in his jacket. Then ask about a 12-year-old named Tate in the van with no front plates. Dale paused. And there's one more name, Nora Mills. She's been missing 2 weeks. I think Bryce knows why. Bryce's jaw tightened. The involuntary contraction of a muscle holding a secret that had just been named. Harlan nodded at his deputy, a woman with steady hands, and she moved toward the staircase. She came back 7 minutes later with a black binder. She opened it on the hall table. Names, dates, dollar amounts in columns. Tate's name with a date 3 weeks past and the word complete. Levi's name with a date 6 days away and a larger number circled. And near the bottom of a bookmarked page, Nora Mills. A notation, compromised, relocated, see Hargrove. Who is Hargrove? Dale asked. Bryce said nothing. Edwin Hargrove, Harlan said quietly. Property development east of the valley. County Business Council. Donated to the sheriff's campaign. Dale looked at the binder. Bryce was operations. Hargrove was money. The house was a way station. The children were inventory. The circled dates were delivery schedules. And Nora had found this. She had come back to the valley, discovered what was happening, and done what she had tried to do 11 years ago. She investigated. She walked into the house pretending to be a caseworker. She asked questions and took pictures. And Hargrove found out. Is she alive? Dale asked. Bryce looked at the floor. He looked at the binder. The architecture was collapsing, and he was inside it. She was when I saw her last, 2 weeks ago. She came to the house asking questions. Took pictures. Hargrove found out. He paused. Hargrove handles his own problems. He has a cabin north of the lake, off Route 9. Dale stepped forward. Reed put a hand on his arm, a reminder that there were children in the room. Dale stopped, breathed, looked at Levi. Levi, go sit with the others. Levi walked to the common room. Gemma, the little red-haired girl, moved closer to him. He put his arm around her, and the gesture was so natural that Dale understood it was something they did. In this house, they took care of each other because no one else would. Harlan guided Bryce to a chair in the hallway. 2 more deputies had come in with the second unit, and a female officer moved to the common room to begin the process of talking to the children. Delia was in the back of a cruiser with the door closed and her face turned toward the window. Dale pulled out his phone and called the bar. Amos picked up on the second ring. Put her on. Footsteps across the bar floor. The creak of the phone being handed over. Then silence, and then a voice that was careful and controlled, the voice of a child who had kept herself steady all evening because there had been no other option and who was not going to stop now, not until she knew. Hello, it's Dale. Levi's safe. He's standing right here. All 6 kids are accounted for. Harlan's handling everything. The line was silent for a long moment. The kind of silence that carries weight, the weight of relief too large to express in the moment of its arrival. All 6, Ruby asked. Nobody got left behind. Another silence, smaller this time, but dense. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady, only just. One more thing. I have information about your mother. She may be at a location north of the lake. We're going to find her, Ruby. The line went completely silent. The silence of someone who had been carrying something so heavy for so long that the offer of help had momentarily taken away the ability to speak. The silence of a 10-year-old who had walked through rain for 3 days and planned every detail she could think of and left the rest to a man she had never met and who was now being told that the rest might be enough. "Okay," she said finally. The word came out smaller than everything else she had said all evening. Just that one word and everything it was holding. "We're bringing Levi to you. Stay where you are." He ended the call and stood in the driveway in the rain and looked at the house. Through the front window, he could see Harlan standing over Bryce's chair, the deputy with the binder, the children in the common room sitting together while the female officer spoke to them. Dale turned to Reed. "Take Levi back to the bar. Put him with Ruby. Stay with them." Reed went inside and came back with Levi. The boy had put on his shoes, old sneakers, with the laces double knotted the way a careful child ties them, and he was wearing a jacket slightly too small, the sleeves ending an inch above his wrists. He walked out onto the porch and stopped and looked at the night. The rain was coming down steadily, and the street light at the end of the block caught it and turned it silver, and the dark pressed in from the trees on both sides. Levi looked at the motorcycles and the men and the cruisers and the wet gravel driveway and the whole impossible machinery of rescue that had assembled itself around him. "Ruby did all this," he said. "Yeah," Dale said. "She did." Levi nodded. Something moved across his face that was too old for 9 and too young for anything else. The expression of a child who had just understood that someone loved him enough to walk through the dark for 3 days to find help that she wasn't sure existed. Reed put Levi on his bike and they pulled out into the rain. Dale watched the taillight disappear down Granger Street. Then he turned to the men who remained. Hargrove's cabin, north of the lake, off Route 9. Jackets zipped, helmets pulled on. The quiet, efficient movement of men who knew what they were doing. Sully was on his phone with Harlan relaying the location. Harlan confirmed the regional task force was being notified and that units would meet them on Route 9. Dale told Sully to tell Harlan to bring medical. They rode north. The road followed the valley floor for the first few miles, cutting through lowland that was flat and open and exposed to the sky, the fields on either side dark and featureless under the rain, the occasional farmhouse visible only as a cluster of lights set back from the road behind fences and windbreaks that had been planted by someone's grandfather and maintained by someone's father and would be maintained by someone's son until the land was sold or the family moved or the trees themselves gave up and died. The pavement was cracked from winter frost and summer heat, repaired in patches that you could feel through the handlebars as the tires crossed them, and the center line had faded to a suggestion rather than a statement. Then the road climbed into the hills where the trees were thicker and the houses were gone, and the only light was what the sky gave them, which tonight was nothing. The rain had eased slightly, but the road was wet, and the curves were blind, and the grades steepened with each switchback, the engines working harder, the sound changing from the low idle of flat road to the deeper note of machines under load. Dale rode at the head of the column with his hands firm on the grips and his weight balanced and his eyes reading the road surface 20 feet ahead, watching for the dark patches that meant standing water and the lighter patches that meant loose gravel washed down from the shoulder by the rain. He rode with the focused attention of a man who could not afford to make a mistake because there was too much waiting on the other side of the ride. A woman in a room that might exist or might not. A sister who might be alive or might not. A chance to undo 11 years of failure, or at least to begin the work of undoing it, which was not the same thing as completion, but was the only place that completion could start. He thought about Nora, not the Nora he had argued with 11 years ago, but the Nora who had come back to the valley without telling him. The Nora who discovered what was happening to children on Granger Street and did not look away. Who walked into a house pretending to be a caseworker because the children inside deserved someone who would fight for them, who was caught and taken and held for 2 weeks and who did not break, who did not give up her children's location to the people who held her because silence was the only protection she could still offer her son and daughter. He thought about the kind of courage that required, not the loud courage of men riding motorcycles through the dark, the quiet courage of a woman in a locked room who chose to protect her children by enduring whatever the room demanded. The courage of keeping silent when speaking would have ended the pain. The courage of trusting that a 10-year-old girl with a ring and a map would find a faded eagle on a bar sign in a valley she didn't know, and that the man who stood under that sign would do what he had failed to do 11 years ago. He thought about the last thing he had said to Nora, "Stop playing detective." And she had looked at him with those dark eyes and walked out, and the door had closed, and he had let it close because he was too proud to follow and too blind to see that she was trying to tell him something real. She had been right about everything. She had been right 11 years ago, and she was right now, and the distance between her rightness and his blindness had cost them more than he could calculate and nearly cost them everything. The column moved through the hills in formation. The engines were low and steady, and the headlights cut through the darkness in narrow beams that illuminated the rain and the road surface and the trunks of trees that pressed close on both sides. Dale could feel the temperature dropping as they climbed the wet cold settling into his hands and his face, and he rode with the particular focus of a man who was running towards something rather than away from it, and who understood that the distance between the two was measured not in miles but in years. The lake appeared through the trees as they crested the ridge, black and still and flat under the rain reflecting nothing. The road curved along its northern shore toward a cluster of properties that sat back from the water behind long gravel drives. Most of the houses were dark at this hour, weekend places owned by people who came up from the city in summer and closed them when the leaves turned. The kind of houses that sat empty for 8 months of the year and collected dust and mouse droppings and the particular silence of spaces that are maintained but not lived in. Sully pulled alongside Dale and pointed to a turnoff ahead, a narrow track that disappeared into the trees with a metal gate across the entrance. The gate was closed but not locked. A chain hung loose from the post, the padlock open, as if someone had arrived recently and hadn't bothered to secure it behind them. Wyatt got off his bike and swung the gate open, and they went through single-file engines barely above idle, following the track through dense woods for a quarter mile until the trees thinned and a clearing opened and a cabin sat in the middle of it. It was larger than the word suggested, a log-frame structure with a wraparound porch in a detached garage, well-maintained, the kind of property that cost real money and was designed to look like it hadn't. The logs were tight and recently stained. The porch railing was straight and solid. A stone chimney rose from the far end of the roof, and smoke came from it in a thin, steady line that moved through the rain and dispersed. A pickup truck sat in front of the garage, late model, clean despite the weather, and a light was on in a window at the back of the cabin, the yellow glow of an interior lamp bleeding through curtains that had been drawn but not completely closed. Dale stopped his bike and studied the cabin. One vehicle, one light, one source of smoke. Either Hargrove was alone or he had someone with him, and either way the cabin was occupied and whatever was inside was about to be found. Harlan's units arrived 4 minutes later, 2 cruisers and an SUV coming up the track with their lights off. Harlan stepped out and walked to where Dale was standing at the edge of the clearing, looking at the cabin through the rain. "Task force is 30 minutes behind us," Harlan said. "I'm not waiting," Dale said. "Neither am I." They went together. Dale and Harlan and 2 deputies approaching the front door, while Wyatt and Sully covered the back. The porch steps creaked under their weight, the wood protesting the sudden load after hours of silence. The front door was solid, heavier than a cabin door needed to be, and the deadbolt was engaged from the inside. Harlan knocked. Official knocked 3 sharp raps with the authority of the badge behind them. Footsteps inside, heavier than Bryce's. Slower. The footsteps of a man who moved through his own space with the certainty of ownership, the particular rhythm of someone who has never been challenged in his own home and doesn't expect to be. The door opened. Edwin Hargrove was 62 years old, silver-haired, wearing a quarter-zip sweater over pressed slacks and leather slippers that looked like they cost more than most of the boots in Eagle's Roost. His face was well-maintained in the way that money maintains faces, the skin tight at the jaw and smooth at the forehead, the lines carefully managed. He looked at Harlan and then at Dale with the expression of a man who was accustomed to being in control of every room he entered and was not yet aware that this room was different. "Deputy," he said. His voice was pleasant, practiced. The voice of a man who had learned to modulate his tone the way a musician tunes an instrument, adjusting it for each audience. "What brings you out here at this hour?" "Mr. Hargrove," Harlan said, "we're executing a search of this property in connection with an ongoing investigation into child trafficking operations in the valley. I'm asking for your voluntary cooperation." The word trafficking changed the air on the porch the way a dropped stone changes the surface of a lake. Hargrove's face performed a sequence of expressions: confusion first, then concern, then a carefully calibrated version of cooperation. each one arriving slightly too late and departing slightly too fast. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. The pleasantness was still there, but it had developed a crack hairline thin running through the center of it. "Bryce does," Dale said. "He's already talking." That landed. The smallest flinch in Hargrove's left eye, a contraction so brief that anyone who wasn't watching for it would have missed it entirely. But Dale was watching for it with the attention of a man who had spent his life reading faces in rooms where the wrong reading could cost you, and he didn't miss it. "I'd like to call my attorney," Hargrove said. "That's your right," Harlan said. "But we're entering this cabin now." They went in. The cabin was warm and smelled of wood smoke and expensive leather. The main room was open plan with a kitchen and a living area. Bookshelves held the kind of books people buy to display rather than read. Hardwood floors polished to a shine. A stone fireplace with a fire burning low. Everything clean, everything ordered. The environment of a man who had built a comfortable life on the surface of something monstrous and had decorated the surface with careful attention to appearance. Harlan directed his deputies to search the bedrooms and the basement. Dale moved through the cabin with his own purpose, checking rooms, opening doors, his boots leaving wet marks on Hargrove's polished floors. He found the locked door at the end of a hallway past the master bedroom. It was a heavy door, heavier than any interior door needed to be, and the lock was a deadbolt commercial grade, the kind of hardware you don't install in a cabin unless you have something behind the door that you don't want leaving. The door frame showed marks where the deadbolt had been installed by someone who knew what they were doing. The cuts clean and the mounting solid, and there was a small gap at the bottom of the door, no more than half an inch, that let through a thin draft of air that was colder than the air in the hallway and carried a different smell, the smell of a space that had been closed for too long with a person inside it. "Open this," Dale said. Hargrove, who had followed them into the hallway with his phone in his hand and his face arranged in aggrieved cooperation, said, "That's a storage room. The key is in my office." "You'll stay where you are," Harlan said. He looked at the deputy beside him. "Get the tools from the cruiser." The deputy came back with a pry bar. The deadbolt gave way on the third attempt, the frame splintering around the lock mechanism with a sharp crack that echoed down the hallway. The door swung inward. The room was small, 10 feet by 12, a cot against one wall with a thin blanket folded at the foot, a bucket in the corner, a single bulb in the ceiling turned off with a pull chain that hung motionless in the still air. No windows. The walls were bare drywall, unpainted, and near the cot, someone had scratched lines into the surface with a fingernail or a piece of something hard. 14 parallel marks, arranged in groups of 5 with 4 remaining, the universal tally of days kept by someone who has no other way to measure the passage of time. 14 marks, 2 weeks, and on the cot, curled against the wall with her knees drawn up and her arms wrapped around herself, was a woman. She was thin in the particular way that people become thin when food has been irregular and insufficient, the cheekbones prominent, and the collarbones visible beneath the collar of a shirt that had not been changed in days. Her dark hair was matted against the side of her face, and her skin had the pallor of someone who had not been outside in weeks, the gray-white of a life lived under artificial light and no light at all. She was wearing jeans and a long-sleeved shirt that had once been white and was now the color of the room, dirty and creased, and carrying the particular weariness of clothing that has been worn past the point of dignity. She was looking at the door with an expression that Dale had to turn away from for a moment before he could face it directly. It was the expression of someone who had stopped expecting the door to open for anything good. The expression of a woman who had been in this room for 14 days and had scratched each one of those days into the wall, because scratching was the only active agency available to her, the only way to insist that she existed and that the days existed and that someone somewhere at some point would count them and understand what they meant. Then she saw him, past the deputy, past Harlan. She saw Dale standing in the doorway of the room where she had been kept for 2 weeks, and her eyes changed. The flatness broke. The survival expression cracked, and beneath it was something that Dale recognized because he had seen it once before on a Christmas morning in their mother's kitchen when a 16-year-old girl opened a newspaper-wrapped package and found a silver ring inside. "Dale," she said. Her voice was a ruin, dry and cracked and barely above a whisper, scraped raw by disuse and dehydration. The voice of someone who had not spoken in days because there was no one to speak to and no reason to try. But his name came through it clearly because some words carry their own power regardless of the instrument that produces them. And his name spoken by his sister in a room that had been her prison for 2 weeks was one of those words. Dale crossed the room in 3 steps. He knelt beside the cot. He did not trust himself to speak right away. He looked at his sister, at Nora, at the woman she had become in the 11 years since he had seen her last. She was 44 now. Her face had changed the way faces change when they are shaped by difficulty rather than time, the lines running deeper and in different directions than age alone would have drawn them, the geography of a life that had asked too much and taken more. But her eyes were the same. Her eyes were the same dark brown. They had always been the same eyes that had looked at him from the other side of a table in this bar 11 years ago. The same eyes that had evaluated him in the garage and measured him at Christmas and trusted him completely right up until the night he proved that trust was misplaced. "I'm here," he said. "I'm here, Nora." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes moved across his face the way Ruby's had earlier that evening, reading him, cataloging the changes, the gray at his temples, the deeper lines, the particular wear of a man who had been carrying guilt for over a decade. And she seemed to find what she was looking for because something in her expression shifted from recognition to relief to something harder to name. "The children," she said. It was the first thing, not "where have you been," not "what took you so long," not any of the things a person might say to someone who had failed them for 11 years and then shown up in a doorway when the world had narrowed to a cot and a bucket and 14 marks on a wall. The children, because that was what mattered to her. That was what had always mattered. "All 6 are safe," Dale said. "Every one of them. Ruby and Levi are together at the bar right now." Nora closed her eyes. Her hands, which had been gripping her own arms, with the white-knuckled intensity of someone holding herself together by force of will, released. Her shoulders dropped. Her breath came out in a long, shaking exhale that sounded like it had been trapped inside her chest for 14 days, held there by the effort of staying alive and staying silent and staying sane in a room where the only company was the marks on the wall and the knowledge that her children were out there somewhere and she could not reach them. "She found the eagle sign," Nora said. She opened her eyes and they were bright with tears that she had not allowed herself to shed because crying required energy she had been using to survive, and because tears were a luxury, and luxuries were the first things she had stripped from her existence when the door locked behind her. "She found it. She found it," Dale said. 3 days she walked, 3 days in the rain. She came into my bar with your ring around her neck and a map in her pocket, and she sat down across from me and told me everything. 10 years old, and she planned the whole thing, Nora. 3 days of cover before she even left the house. Notes on her pillow every morning. A hand-drawn map with every detail marked. A list of every child in the house with their names and ages and descriptions. She thought of everything. Nora's face crumbled. Not all at once, in stages. The controlled expression she had maintained through 2 weeks of captivity, the expression she had worn like armor, gave way first at the eyes, then at the mouth, then at the jaw, each layer of composure falling away like the walls of a house collapsing inward. And what was underneath all of it, what the armor had been protecting, was the raw, unprotected face of a mother who had sent her daughter into the dark with nothing but a ring and a prayer, and had spent every day since wondering whether the prayer was enough. She cried, not loudly, the quiet, convulsive crying of someone whose body remembers how to produce tears but has forgotten the rhythms that organize them. The crying coming in waves that had no pattern and no end, just the pure, unstructured release of everything she had held inside the room and inside herself for 14 days. Dale put his arms around her and held her carefully because she was fragile in ways he could see and ways he couldn't, and he held her the way you hold something that has been broken and is beginning the long, uncertain process of determining whether it can be put back together. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out rough and uneven, scraped from somewhere deep, from the same place where he had kept the memory of her walking out of the bar 11 years ago, and the door closing behind her and his own stubborn pride keeping him in his seat. "I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I let you walk out. I'm sorry for all of it, Nora, every day. I'm sorry for every day." She didn't answer right away. She leaned into him and breathed and let herself be held, and the room was very quiet around them. And Harlan stood in the doorway and looked at the wall with the marks on it and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would be more useful than silence. After a while, Nora spoke. Her voice was stronger than it had been, still damaged, but carrying more weight the way a cracked bell still rings if you strike it right. "You're here now," she said. It was not forgiveness exactly. It was something more practical and more generous. The acknowledgement that the past existed and mattered and could not be undone, and that the present was happening and mattered more, and that the distance between a man who didn't listen 11 years ago and a man who rode through the rain tonight was a distance that could be measured but did not need to be because measurement was not the same as meaning. The paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. They were gentle and efficient, and they spoke to Nora in the low, steady tones of professionals who understood that the first moments of freedom after captivity were as disorienting as the captivity itself. They checked her vitals and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and gave her water that she drank slowly, carefully, the way Ruby had eaten her soup with the focused attention of someone who had learned not to take sustenance for granted. Hargrove was in handcuffs in the main room. His quarter-zip sweater was rumpled, and his silver hair was out of place, and the expression on his face had completed its journey from confusion, through concern, through cooperation, and arrived at the particular frozen blankness of a man who understood that everything he had built, the reputation, the business, the county council seat, the donated campaigns, the cabin on the lake, all of it, every surface and every structure was over. Harlan was reading him his rights in a voice that carried no emotion, the deliberate neutrality of a professional performing a duty that had never felt this necessary. Dale helped Nora to the porch. She stopped at the top of the steps and looked out at the night. The rain had stopped. The clouds had pulled apart in the west, and a few stars were visible above the tree line, small and bright against the black, and the air was clean and cold, and carried the smell of wet pine and wood smoke, and the particular freshness that comes after rain, the smell of the world washing itself. "Tate," she said. "The boy. Do you know where he is?" "Harlan's working on it. They found records, names, dates, locations. They're going to find him." Nora nodded. She stood on the porch and looked at the stars and breathed the clean, cold air and did not move. Dale stood beside her and let her have the moment. A moment between the room she had been in and the world she was returning to. A moment to stand in the open and remember what it felt like to be outside and upright and breathing air that nobody controlled. They drove back to the bar in Sully's truck. Nora was not strong enough for the bike. Sully drove slowly and carefully, taking the curves with the gentleness of a man handling something precious, easing through the switchbacks with none of the urgency that had driven their ride up, and all of the care that the ride down demanded. The truck's headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness and found the road in sections, each curve revealing itself one piece at a time, and the engine sound was steady and low, the mechanical equivalent of a voice speaking softly. Nora sat in the passenger seat with the blanket around her shoulders and watched the road and did not speak. Her hands were in her lap, no longer gripping her own arms, and her breathing had settled into a rhythm that was closer to normal than anything she had produced in the last 2 weeks. The heater was on, and the cab was warm, and the windshield was clear, and outside the trees moved past like witnesses to a procession, silent and upright and spaced at intervals that seemed almost deliberate. Dale sat in the back seat behind Sully and watched the road unwind behind them through the rear window. The trees that had pressed close on the way up now opened and receded as they descended the hillside, giving way to the valley floor in stages, each stage bringing more open sky and more distance, and the gradual flattening of terrain that meant they were getting close. He could see the first stars appearing in the gaps between clouds, cold and precise, each one a point of light that had been there all night and was only now visible because the clouds were thinning and the rain was done and the sky was beginning the slow process of clearing itself for morning. He thought about the chain of events that had begun with a 10-year-old girl walking through a bar door, a ring on a chain, a map drawn in pencil, a list of 6 names, 3 days of walking through the rain, the courage to sit down across from a stranger and deliver the information that would set everything in motion. And underneath all of it, behind every detail and every plan and every careful calculation, the simple, desperate faith of a child who believed that if she could find the right sign above the right door, someone on the other side of it would help. Ruby had believed that. She had believed it hard enough to walk for 3 days through weather that would have discouraged most adults in terrain she didn't know, in a valley that was strange to her. She had believed it without evidence and without guarantee and without any assurance beyond her mother's voice telling her to find the eagle sign. And she had been right. The faith had been justified. The door had opened. The man behind it had listened. And now, in a truck descending through the hills, with the stars beginning to show and the dawn beginning to build, and a woman wrapped in a blanket who had been in a locked room 14 hours ago, the faith was being rewarded with something that felt like the beginning of justice, or at least the beginning of its possibility. The bar lot was nearly empty when they pulled in. Most of the bikes were gone, their riders dispersed to wherever the night took them after the work was done. The lot was quiet in a way it almost never was, the gravel still, and the puddles undisturbed, the rain-washed surfaces reflecting the pre-dawn sky and dark mirrors that held the last stars and the first suggestions of gray. Reed's bike was still there, parked near the door, with the precision of a man who parked the way he did everything else deliberately and without waste. And the bar sign was still throwing its pale orange light across the wet gravel, the eagle catching what was left of the night and holding it the way it always had, faithfully and without complaint. The sign looked different to Dale now. Not the faded bird with the bad paint job he had passed 1,000 times without really seeing it. Something else entirely. A marker. A beacon. The thing his sister had told her daughter to find, and the thing her daughter had found after 3 days of walking through rain and darkness in the vast uncharted territory of a child's determination. Sully stopped the truck and Dale helped Nora out. She stood in the gravel lot and looked at the bar and took a breath that shook in her chest, the breath of a woman who was looking at a building she had never been inside, but that she had told her daughter to find and that her daughter had found. She looked at the sign. She read it the way her daughter must have read it 3 days ago, as a destination, as a promise, as the answer to a question that she had posed by pressing a ring into a child's hand and saying, "Find this place and show them what you carry." Dale put his hand on her back and they walked to the door. He opened it. The bar was quiet inside. Amos had turned off the jukebox and the overhead lights were down to half, and the room had the particular warmth of a space that has been cleared of everything unnecessary and filled with only what matters. The chairs were pushed in. The pool table was dark. The bar top was wiped clean and the glasses were put away. Reed was standing near the pool table with his arms folded, watchful and still. Amos was behind the bar, his hands flat on the wood, his face carrying the same expression it had carried all evening, the expression of a man who had positioned himself as a wall and intended to remain one for as long as the situation required. And in the corner booth, sitting side by side with their shoulders touching, were Ruby and Levi. Ruby's hands were around her water glass, the same glass she had been holding when Dale left, and the glass was full because Amos had refilled it without being asked. Levi was leaning against his sister with his eyes half closed, the complete exhaustion of a child who had finally found a safe place to rest after weeks of not having one. Ruby's arm was around his shoulders, holding him the way she had learned to hold him in the house on Granger Street, protectively and completely, with the full-body commitment of a sister who had made her brother's safety the organizing principle of her life. The ring on its chain caught the bar light from Ruby's neck and held it small and silver, the cross visible, the scratch invisible but present. Ruby looked up when the door opened. She saw Dale first. Then she saw the woman standing beside him with a blanket around her shoulders and dark hair and dark eyes that were the same shape as her own. She didn't move right away. She sat very still in the booth and looked at her mother across the length of the bar, and her face did the thing that Dale had seen on Levi's face an hour earlier at the top of the stairs in the house on Granger Street. The rapid sequence of a child processing something too large for the space available. Relief that flooded in faster than the mind could organize. Disbelief that tried to hold the relief back and failed. And the particular trembling joy of someone who had prepared herself for every outcome, including the worst one, and was now being given the best one and didn't quite know how to hold it because she had practiced holding the worst and not this. Then she moved. She slid out of the booth and stood and crossed the bar floor, and she was not running exactly, but she was not walking either. She was moving at the speed of a child who had been exactly as composed as she needed to be for exactly as long as she needed to be, and was now spending the last of that composure on these final steps, these last few feet between the booth and the door, between the planning and the result, between the faith and the proof of it. Nora dropped to her knees on the bar floor. She opened her arms, and the gesture was instinctive and total, the arms opening wide with the particular reach of a mother who wants to contain her child completely. And Ruby walked into them, and Nora closed her arms around her daughter and held on with the fierce total grip of two people who had been separated by something terrible and had found their way back through it. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the holding didn't already contain. The words that might have been spoken, the reassurances and the explanations, and the questions and the promises, all of them existed inside the embrace, and none of them needed to be released into the air to do their work. Levi was there a moment later. He had followed Ruby from the booth, moving more slowly, watching with the cautious hope of a child who has learned to verify before he trusts. Nora reached out one arm without letting go of Ruby and pulled him in, and the three of them knelt together on the bar floor in the warm half-light, holding each other in a knot of arms and blankets and dark hair, and the bright red of Ruby's jacket in the bar was completely silent around them. Dale stood near the door and watched. Reed was beside him, arms still folded, face still the readiness that had defined his posture all evening, now serving a different purpose. Not preparation for action, but protection of stillness. Amos had his hands flat on the bar top and his head slightly bowed, and his face, which never showed much and never needed to, was showing something now. Something that moved behind his features, the way weather moves behind mountains, visible only at the edges. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The room held its breath for as long as the moment needed, and the moment needed a while. After a long time, Nora lifted her head. She looked across the bar at Dale. Her face was wet, and her eyes were red, and she was smiling. Not a big smile, not the kind you perform for an audience or arrange for a photograph. The small, private smile of someone who has been given something she had stopped hoping for and doesn't yet trust herself to hold it, but is going to try. "Thank you," she said. Dale shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank your daughter. She did all of it." Ruby turned her head and looked at Dale. She was still in her mother's arms, her bright red rain jacket pressed against Nora's blanket, and her face was wet, and her ponytail had finally come loose, and her dark hair fell across her shoulders. She looked at Dale with an expression that was different from every expression she had worn that evening. Not the measuring look she had given him at the table, not the careful blankness she had used to describe the house, not the steady purpose she had shown when she handed him the map. Something simpler and younger and more honest than any of those things. The expression of a child looking at someone and deciding that the world might be better than she had been taught to believe. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." Amos brought water and warm soup for Nora. He brought blankets from the back room. He moved around the bar with the quiet efficiency that had defined him all evening, providing what was needed without asking permission or seeking acknowledgement. Reed pulled tables together near the corner booth to create a space where the three of them could sit together, and Nora ate slowly while Ruby sat beside her with one hand on her mother's arm, confirming by touch that she was real and present and not going to disappear again. Levi fell asleep against his mother's side 15 minutes after she sat down. The complete, immediate surrender of a body that had been running on alertness for weeks and had finally been given permission to stop. Nora put her arm around him and held him while he slept and looked at Ruby across the top of his head. "Tell me," Nora said. Ruby told her. All of it. The 3 days of planning, the notes on the pillow, the search for the eagle sign through the rain, the map she drew from memory, the list she wrote the first night, walking into a bar full of strangers and sitting down across from a man she had never met and telling him everything because her mother had said he would help and her mother had been right. Nora listened without interrupting. Her face moved through a sequence of emotions as Ruby spoke. Pride that was fierce and absolute, pain that was just as fierce, and the particular anguish of a mother who understood that her child's capability was born from her child's suffering, that the skills Ruby had displayed, the planning, the composure, the ability to read adults and assess threats and manage information, were skills that no 10-year-old should have needed to develop and that Ruby had developed because the world had demanded them of her. "I taught you too much," Nora said quietly. "You taught me enough," Ruby said. They sat together in the bar while the night moved toward morning. The warmth of the room settled around them like a second blanket, and the quiet was the kind of quiet that heals rather than oppresses, the quiet of a space that has been cleared of danger and filled with presence. Ruby sat close to her mother and did not move away, maintaining contact at all times, her shoulder against Nora's arm, her hand on Nora's sleeve, the physical confirmation of proximity that a child needs when the person she loves has been absent, and the absence was terrifying, and the return is still too new to trust entirely. Nora held Levi while he slept and stroked his hair, with the absent repetitive motion of a mother who has been separated from her children and is relearning the physical vocabulary of care. Her hand moved through his dark hair in slow passes, each pass a statement, each statement the same. I am here, I am here, I am here. The repetition was as much for her as for him, the tactile proof of a reality she had spent 2 weeks doubting, in a room where reality was a small thing, bounded by four walls and a locked door. Harlan called twice. The first call confirmed that the regional task force had taken over the Hargrove investigation and that additional arrests were being made at locations connected to the network. Two more houses in neighboring counties had been identified from the binder's records, each one operating with the same structure as the house on Granger Street, a rotating staff of adults, a population of children who had been placed there through channels that bypassed legitimate oversight, and a connection to Hargrove's financial network that the forensic accountants were already beginning to trace. A man in a blue sedan who had been identified from the binder's records was pulled over on the interstate at 2 in the morning with a laptop in his passenger seat that contained files the task force described as significant, which was the word law enforcement used when the actual word was too terrible to put in a phone call at 3 in the morning. The scope of the thing was becoming visible in the way that scope becomes visible when you pull on a thread and the thread keeps coming, and you realize that what you thought was a single thread is a web, and the web is larger than anyone suspected, and the web has been operating in plain sight for years in the spaces between the things that people pay attention to. The second call an hour later delivered the news that Dale had been waiting for. Tate had been found, a foster home 70 miles east of the valley, placed there through a falsified arrangement that Hargrove's network had constructed with the bureaucratic precision of people who understood that paperwork was the best camouflage. Tate was alive and unhurt and was being brought into protective custody. The other children from the house on Granger Street were being placed with emergency foster families vetted by the county, and Gemma, the 7-year-old with red hair, who had been scared of loud noises and who had moved closer to Levi on the couch and then closer again when Oliver came in, was going to a family that had been cleared that same night by a caseworker who understood that speed and thoroughness were not mutually exclusive when a child needed somewhere safe to sleep. Dale took each call standing at the bar, facing away from the booth, so that whatever showed on his face was his own business. After the second call, he turned around and walked to the table. Tate's been found, he said. He's okay. Nora closed her eyes. Ruby reached across the table and took her mother's hand. All of them, Ruby said. Nobody got left behind. She said it the way she had said it on the phone, with the particular emphasis of someone for whom that fact was not just important but essentially the organizing principle of everything she had done. She had not set out to save herself. She had not set out to save only Levi. She had set out to bring help that would reach everyone, and the help had reached everyone, and she needed to hear it confirmed, because the confirmation was what made the 3 days of rain and fear and planning worth what they had cost. The sky outside the bar windows began to lighten. Not much. The first gray suggestion of dawn at the eastern edge of the valley, barely visible through the trees, the earliest possible indication that the night was releasing its hold and the day was preparing to take over. The rain had stopped entirely, and the gravel lot was wet and still, and the bar sign had turned itself off at some automatic hour, and the eagle was just paint again, rust-colored and patient, waiting for the next evening when the light would return and the glow would come back and the sign would do what it had always done. Dale sat at the bar. He was alone for the first time all evening. Reed had gone home. Sully had gone home. Wyatt had gone home. Amos was in the back doing whatever Amos did when the bar was empty and the night was over and the cleaning that needed doing could wait until the morning that was already beginning. Nora and the children were asleep in the corner booth. Nora stretched across the bench with Ruby curled against her, and Levi curled against Ruby. The three of them arranged like puzzle pieces that had been scattered across a table by careless hands, and then, after a long time, fitted back together by hands that were more careful. Dale looked at the booth and thought about 11 years. 11 years of looking for someone who had been trying to do the right thing. 11 years of silence that could have been broken at any time by a single act of faith, a single decision to believe his sister, instead of judging her, to listen, instead of lecture, to follow, instead of dismiss. He thought about Ruby walking through the rain for 3 days with a ring around her neck and a map in her pocket. He thought about the particular kind of courage that lives in a 10-year-old girl who decides to save her brother and her mother and four other children she barely knows, and who builds a plan to do it, and who executes that plan with a precision and a composure that most adults never achieve in a lifetime of trying. He thought about what Reed had said in the parking lot hours ago, when the night was still dark and the engines were still running and the work was still ahead of them. Your sister taught her that kind of thinking. Nora had always known how to prepare for the worst. She had tried to tell him. She had tried to teach him the same thing she had taught her daughter, that the world contained things that needed to be fought, and that fighting them required preparation and courage, and the willingness to walk into rooms where you weren't welcome and ask questions that nobody wanted to answer. He hadn't listened. He had called it playing detective and told her to come home. And now, because Nora had taught her daughter what she had tried to teach her brother, 6 children were safe, and a woman was free, and a network was collapsing, and a man in a quarter-zip sweater was sitting in a cell contemplating the architecture of his own ruin. All of it because a 10-year-old girl had walked through a door with a ring around her neck and the steady brown eyes of her mother, and a plan that she had built from nothing but love and necessity and 3 days of careful thought. He stood and walked into the corner booth. He stood there for a moment looking at the 3 of them sleeping. Ruby's face was relaxed in a way it hadn't been all evening. The careful measuring expression was gone. The practical blankness was gone. The steady purpose was gone. In sleep, she looked like what she was, a 10-year-old girl who had been brave enough for a lifetime and was finally temporarily allowed to rest. Something on the table caught his eye. Next to Ruby's water glass, so small he almost missed it, was the ring. Ruby had taken it from around her neck and placed it on the table. Set carefully on the wood centered in its own small space, positioned with the deliberate precision that characterized everything Ruby did. She had left it there for him. He knew that without being told, the way he knew that the scratch on the ring was from a wrench in his mother's garage, and the cross was cut from a borrowed engraving tool on a winter afternoon. She had carried the ring for 2 weeks, through the rain and the fear and the 3 days of searching. She had carried it the way a soldier carries a mission order, close and constant, and with the full understanding that its value exceeded her own safety. And now she was giving it back. Not because she didn't need it anymore, but because she understood what it meant. The ring had traveled from Dale to Nora to Ruby and back again. Each person who held it had added something to its weight. Dale's guilt, Nora's faith, Ruby's courage. And now it was sitting on a bar table in the early morning light, small and silver, with the same faint scratch along one edge it had always had, waiting for the man who had given it away to pick it up and decide what it meant now that it had come home. Dale picked it up. He held it in his palm and looked at it for a long time. The cross etched into the face, the scratch from the wrench, the tarnish from years of being worn against skin, the weight of it, which was almost nothing and was everything. He closed his hand around the ring and stood there in the quiet bar, while the dawn came in through the windows and the valley outside began the slow process of waking up. He thought about what comes next, the investigations that were already underway, the trials that would follow, the long and complicated process of helping 6 children find their way to something that looked like a normal life, the conversations he would need to have with Nora, conversations that were 11 years overdue and could not be compressed or rushed or shortcut, conversations that would require him to say things he had never said and hear things he had never heard, and sit with the weight of his own failures without flinching or defending or explaining them away. The work of rebuilding a relationship that he had damaged through the particular arrogance of a man who thought he knew better and learned too late that he didn't. Ruby had given him that chance. By walking through a door with a ring and a map, by sitting down across from a stranger and delivering the information that set everything in motion, by trusting her mother's instructions and her own planning, and the possibility that the world contained people who would help if you could find them and show them what you carried. She had given him the chance to be the man his sister had needed him to be 11 years ago, and that he had not been. He put the ring in his pocket. He would keep it there next to the map Ruby had drawn. The ring and the map side by side in the inside pocket of his vest, where they would ride with him on every road and through every turn, a reminder of what a 10-year-old girl had done when the adults in her life had failed, and the world had closed in, and the only option was to walk through the rain until she found a faded eagle on a sign above a door. Amos came out from the back and saw Dale standing near the booth. He looked at the sleeping family. He looked at Dale. He didn't say anything. He walked behind the bar and started making coffee, and the sound of it, the quiet domestic rhythm of water heating and cups being set out, filled the room with a particular warmth of ordinary life, continuing in the aftermath of extraordinary events. It was the most comforting sound Dale had heard all night. Dale sat down at the bar and waited for the coffee and watched the dawn fill the valley through the windows. Somewhere east of here, Tate was being driven to safety by people who would take care of him. Somewhere in the county, Hargrove was sitting in a cell, understanding for the first time what it felt like to be in a room you couldn't leave. Somewhere on the interstate, a task force was pulling on threads that would lead to more rooms and more names and more children who needed finding. And on Granger Street, the house was empty and the lights were off and the van had been towed and the back gate stood open to the alley, and the silence in that house was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of children who had been told not to make noise. Not the silence of a man with a binder keeping inventory. The silence of a place that had been emptied of its purpose and left to stand in the rain with nothing inside it but the ghosts of what had happened there. Amos set a cup of coffee in front of Dale, black, no sugar, the same way he had been serving it for 11 years. Dale wrapped his hands around it and felt the heat move into his palms and then into his fingers and then into the bones beneath the slow, steady warmth of something simple and good. He raised the cup and drank, and the coffee was hot and bitter and exactly what it needed to be. He set the cup down and looked at the bar around him, the room where everything had changed, the same room where he had sat 11 years ago and let his sister walk out the door. The same yellow lights, the same wooden bar top, the same floor that Ruby's boots had left wet prints on when she walked in, the prints, now dry and gone, absorbed into the wood the way everything was absorbed into this place. Eventually the laughter and the arguments and the pool games and the bourbon and the nights that mattered and the nights that didn't and the one night that mattered more than all the others combined. This bar had been here for decades. It would be here for decades more. The sign would keep its pale orange glow. The eagle would keep its lopsided eyes. Men would keep their regular stools and their regular drinks and their regular arguments about engines and football. But tonight the bar had become something more than what it was. Tonight it had become the place where a 10-year-old girl in a red rain jacket had come looking for help and found it. The place where a family had come apart and come back together. The place where the distance between failure and redemption had been measured not in miles or years, but in the width of a doorway and the decision to walk through it. Behind him in the corner booth, Ruby shifted in her sleep. She pressed closer to her mother, her hands small and relaxed, and finally at rest, settled on the table near the place where the ring had been. And outside, the sun crested the ridge, and the first true light of morning moved across the valley floor, and the wet trees caught it and held it in their bare branches, and the gravel lot brightened from dark to gray to the particular clean gold of autumn dawn, after rain, and the eagle on the sign above the door emerged from the darkness, rust-colored and patient, waiting for whatever came next. With the same quiet certainty, it had always had its talons forward, its wings pulled tight against its body, diving towards something only it could see.